It's episode 1, season 1 of Non-Fic Pod with Byrne and Codd. It's Codd here. Hello. And I am delighted to say that for this very introductory, wonderful, lovely, jubbly episode of Non-Fic Pod, Byrne is going to kick things off by describing herself in 10 words or less. Over to her.
Geeky, stressed, funny, overly conscientious, can't count while talking. Was that 10?
Yeah, that was 10, and that was with me counting.
Thank you for counting for me. How about you? 10 words or less.
Neurotic, panic head.
Sorry, was that erotic or neurotic?
I will leave that to you. I'm very much one of those people who believes that the reader is in charge and you can interpret things however you want. So actually think a combination of neurotic and erotic is bang on.
Brilliant.
And I've now given you about 5,000 words. So there you go. Non-fic pod, non-fiction. I think we need to talk about this because there might be some people wondering why non-fiction needs a podcast. And actually, okay, there are other non-fiction podcasts, we should clarify, but not many, right? And doing slightly different things from what we're attempting to do. And so as an intro to Non-Fic Pod, why does non-fiction need this attention?
Yeah, I feel like non-fiction doesn't get the love it deserves. When you think of, the major publishing prizes tend to be for novels and then perhaps poetry, although I doubt poetry feels like, the popular girl at the party. But if novels of Beyonce, sort of like powerful and world famous and glamorous and winning all the awards, then non-fiction is Janelle Monáe, sort of quirky and awesome and infinitely rewarding and forever new. I kind of feel like if novels are wine, then non-fiction is scotch. It's very hard to write escapist non-fiction by definition, but really good non-fiction draws you in into a field that you never knew, into a world that you never knew. So it's escapist from your own experience, but it is very like a friend inviting you in to something that they are passionate about, that they have experienced, and that they really want to share with you. And at its best, well-written non-fiction is just awe-inspiring. Whereas I think most of us, because the non-fiction we grow up with tends to be school textbooks, which favour precision over passion, there is a tendency to, I think quite a lot of people's journeys go being made to read things at school that they don't like, finally getting back into the world of fiction, and then probably a little later on getting back into the world of non-fiction. Not everyone, obviously, as a wild generalisation, but I feel like, non-fiction is the nerdy sidekick to fiction's sort of glamorous superhero lead in the movie of the world. And I don't think that's fair.
Yeah, I always think it's quite mean that non-fiction gets defined as a non-thing. Like it's, fiction, like the word itself, it sounds so zippy and fun. And then, that's non-fiction over there. I mean, you don't want to hang out with her. But it's interesting what you're saying about most people's journeys, because actually, if you think about so many podcasts and films and TV series, it's the non-fiction stuff that often gets tongues wagging,
Yeah, I'd love at some point to get a documentary maker or two on the podcast and see how they feel, and whether or not sort of factual programming, because we don't talk about factual books, but factual programming is treated with slightly less, I don't know, awe and reverence than drama. It's all drama. You have to make it all up from your head, whereas if you're writing something factual, you're one step up from a stenographer. And of course that isn't true. Really good non-fiction, for want of a better word, is a really nice phrase that it's where art meets truth. When you can convey something that is real and is happening in the world, whether that is something that has happened to you in memoir, or whether that is, myself, I write sort of popular science, whether that's what's happening in research. There is still a need to craft something compelling that people want to read. A list of papers and their conclusions does not a good nonfiction book make. And also, likewise, in fiction, there is so much world building that is required. I mean, historical fiction quite obviously relies a lot on research, but even in things like science fiction and fantasy, there are certain things that I know authors will go and check, like what is the psychology of somebody who is the kind of person that would do this. And quite often that advice in fiction to write what you know, there's this idea that you have to do some form of research. With this podcast, by letting people hear from the people who are writing nonfiction and to hear the passion in their voices, they might be more tempted to reach out and try some of the passion on the page, because nonfiction authors are some of the most fascinating people to hang out with. They are passionate, driven, committed, but also just love explaining their subjects. So yeah, we're going to have some amazing people on the show this season. I'm so excited.
I should point out that we're obviously very biased in terms of thinking that nonfiction writers are the most fascinating and excellent people that you should definitely invite round for dinner. We've both published nonfiction books. I actually studied fiction and then was like, well, naff off with this, because with fiction, you have to write a whole bloody book and then shop it around to the publishers. And then the publisher's like, well, I kind of like it if you change this and change that. Send it back to me in a year. Whereas nonfiction, you just write a little bit, send it around. Oh, yeah, we'll pay you to write the rest.
Yeah, that accessibility of being able to write a proposal and then potentially get paid to write the rest of the book. My God, advances are still a thing in nonfiction.
Wow.
We're going to add for our Patreon subscribers, for our Patreon backers, we are adding an extra bit to our podcasts called Shit I Wish I'd Known, which is things like that Georgie and I and our guests have found out during a career of nonfiction writing. And so if you either are just curious about the nonfiction industry and publishing in general, or you're thinking of doing it yourself, or you are a nonfiction writer and you're missing being able to hang out with your fellow nonfiction buddies at some Society of Authors event, that's the place to go. We're going to have an extra bit for you about, how to write nonfiction, how to research for it, how to make sure that the art does meet the truth. So yeah, please do keep an eye on our Patreon for that, because that's coming very soon.
And in fact, if there's anything you do want to know about nonfiction that you don't know already, you can ask us through our social media channel on Twitter, right, Emma?
That is correct, yes. So Twitter, we are nonficpod, just lots of three letters smashed together with no punctuation, which is how I like to write. Sorry, editor.
If people have things that they're burning to know, burning like a painful UTI after 3 weeks and they've got the wrong antibiotics, then come to social media and we will ease your pain, potentially.
Yeah, it's not often that we sort of go, yeah, Twitter is definitely the penicillin of no. But we, I believe, are a wonderful broad spectrum antibiotic for the burning UTI of your need to know.
Let us soothe you. So
one of the things we'll talk about is the importance of metaphor.
Yes, absolutely. Get those metaphors going. And actually, Byrne, you didn't mention in your 10 words or less that you're quite good at the old swear words, eh?
I am. Sorry for the fact that this podcast has a little E next to it in your favourite podcatcher. I hope that's not putting off too many people. I wrote a book called Swearing is Good for You, which came out in 2017, and have spent the intervening 4 years being essentially the sweary scientist, which is a little unfair because there are lots of other scientists who are studying swearing, and I name check them liberally whenever I talk about the book. But I'm about to drop a book on parenting, which is going to be an interesting pivot.
Oh, what books got you into nonfiction as a thing that you're like, oh my God, I can't get enough of this?
funnily enough, I was blogging about this the other day. Blogging is like podcasts but written down, if anyone remembers those.
Oh, yeah.
And it was I was definitely Watching the English by Kate Fox, which was based on her research, but is such a fun and just fantastically entertaining way of writing about what anthropology is by talking about a subject that many of the readers would be familiar with, i.e., the social habits of the English. I remember my husband picked up a copy of, it wasn't the full book, it was a short essay that she'd published about the rituals of going to the pub, in an attempt to shame a somewhat parsimonious member of our group into buying his fucking rounds. But I remember reading the full book when it came out about a year or so after that, and just devouring it from cover to cover, and realizing that the ability to be playful with material that is serious, as long as you respect the material, and her ability to explain how these conclusions were reached without sort of making people feel like they were in an anthropology 101. Here's the methodology, study it wisely. It's just such a wonderful guide, and it does feel like a friend talking you through their most interesting research. And so that was one of the first books that made me go, it is possible to write about one's research in a way that isn't, sort of in journal-ese, not written for that level of, you're basically saying to your audience, if this is how you want to reproduce my work, this is how you would reproduce it. It's one of the major functions of peer review, is saying that this should be reproducible. Whereas with this, it's not, here is how you would reproduce it. It is, here's what I found and why it's really interesting. And realizing that there was this other register that you could write about research in, really excited me. And then a little after that, I started reading as an American author, Mary Roach, who's written a series of books, most of which have one-word titles like Gulp and Bonk and Stiff, which are respectively about, I think Gulp is Journeys Through the Alimentary Canal, Bonk is obviously about sex, and Stiff is about what happens to us when we're cadavers. She's also written things like Packing for Mars, and she takes essentially quite an anthropologist's view of science. What are these people doing when they are doing this research, to the point where she volunteers for various studies, including a study about what goes on in people's bodies when they're having sexual intercourse during Bonk, by volunteering herself and her husband to go and shack in an MRI tube.
Whoa.
I know, right? So there is that kind of anthropology, memoir, science reportage, and that I love. So one of the teaching things I'm doing is, how to write about nonfiction, and the fact that there are so many genres, and you can genre blend around a single subject, or around a particular theme. And that is one of the most joyful things to do, is to be able to play with, here's the interesting finding, here's the reportage on, the person whose lab I went and visited, here's the sort of more philosophical thing of what this means for society. Whether that is something as base, let's say, as mundane as shagging or swearing, or whether that is something like, the social habits of an entire people, that it is possible to do really fun things with nonfiction. How about you, God? What were the books that got you into the idea of writing nonfiction?
Ooh, I think I was first drawn into just, I mean, why wouldn't you love nonfiction? It's like if you sat at the pub with a group of people and somebody starts telling a story and then at the end they go, by the way, I just made that up. I mean, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? You're like, oh, thanks for that story. It means nothing to me now. Whereas, what you want is the story. It's like, oh my God, this actually just happened to me, guys. And then whatever. Anyway, the books that really suck me in and still do are It's a bit niche and possibly says some terrible things about my character. Mountaineering disaster books.
Huh.
Yeah, I love a mountaineering disaster book. Specifically, I was won over by John Krakauer's book Into Thin Air. He wrote the book, was it Into the Wild as well, that was made into a film? But yeah, Into Thin Air, it's so well written, so compellingly written about a really disastrous year on Everest, essentially, where the death toll from the climbers was really, really large, and it was fascinating. So many interesting nuggets and bits of information, and I don't know what it is about mountaineering disaster books, but I love them so much, and non-disaster books. I think it's just that sense of, oh my God, right now as I'm reading this, there could well be somebody stuck on a mountain in conditions that are so alien and cold and terrifying. And how are they doing it? And why are they doing that? That's what I'm really interested in. Like, what drove you? And there's also part of me that's kind of wants to go and try it myself, but I think it'd be terrible because I've got no coordination.
I sort of get the feeling that you are intrigued by life that is not at sea level. Because We Swim to the Shark is all about diving.
Oh yes, that's my book. My book.
Plug your book. So yeah, We Swim to the Shark. We have a brilliant one of the early episodes of this series will be actually me interviewing Georgie about We Swim to the Shark.
Yeah, sorry guys.
No apology required, because we have actually already edited that through the magic of podcasting. This is not all happening in the right order, like my life. So yeah, Georgie wrote We Swim to the Shark, which is about, well, diving permeates the book and is the backbone of the book. And yeah, that idea again of there are things that you are out of the normal world, you are out of your normal environment, that, at one atmosphere and sea level, things that are very easy suddenly become much, much harder when you're either very, very high up or very, very, very low down. So yeah, maybe the sequel is a mountaineering one.
God, I know I wouldn't be around to be able to write it. I think I'm pretty sure I'd go down a crevasse. But yeah, I'm very much a thrill-seeking non-fiction reader, I've just realised. My favourite non-fiction book, and I think probably the one that made me realise, oh yeah, I really love non-fiction, is a book called The Lobotomist by Jack L. High. I think that's how you pronounce it, EL-HAI. And I picked it up in a secondhand bookshop. And it's so gory and interesting and gory and horrific. And I think I just like reading things that really send a shiver down my spine and make me grateful for being cozy on my sofa or wherever I happen to be at the time. So I'll be drawn to those in this series, I can tell you.
If you like the shivers down the spine, I have to recommend The Butchering Art by Lindsay Fitzharris, which is all about Joseph Lister's quest to transform surgery. And it's great. I mean, yeah, the grisly world of Victorian medicine. And it made me so thankful to live in the 20th and 21st, the late 20th and early 21st century, or antiseptic and anaesthetic changing the way in which surgery is done. It used to be the case, for example, that surgeons basically were ranked on how quickly they could take a limb off, because you did not want that to go on for a long time in the absence of anaesthetic.
Oh my God, so they could actually have actual Olympics that were like...
No Olympics.
No Olympics!
Sorry, yeah, it's dark. It's such a good book about the history of surgery and how far we have come. And it makes you it made me anyway, phenomenally grateful for the advances in the field of medicine.
We've got some great guests coming up over the series. Some confirmed so far. I'm going to be speaking to Rosie Wilby soon, who's written the breakup monologues. Who are you speaking to next, Emma? Although this might not be the order that the things come out in, guys. So
we're teasing here. We may drop in a different order. So my next interview is with a chap called Daniel Smith, who is a prolific non-fiction author of the How to Think Like series, which covers everyone from Stephen Steve Jobs to Sherlock Holmes. But he has been delving into the love letters of kings and queens, and I am absolutely fascinated. It's really interesting. I almost wish we could do the timetabling so that we could get Rosie and Dan together on mic, because there is one particular a letter between a monarch and his consort that is very much in the conscious uncoupling vein. And you're like, oh, well, this is very humane. This sort of, just because we're miserable together does not mean we're condemned to be miserable for life. Let us live apart. And the reply back is, how dare you? I am the mother of your child. I am the future Queen of England. How dare you? So yes, we're going to be going into some of the drama. It's Bridgerton level stuff, man.
Oh, wowzers. We're going to have so much drama. But we'll also take it in different directions. That's the joy of nonfiction, right? We can go crime, we can go science, we can go breaking up with people, we can go anywhere, because it's all about the world and the universe and people and animals and God knows. Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nonfic Pod with Byrne and Codd. Our guests this week were Byrne and Codd.
You can really help us by rating, reviewing and sharing Nonfic Pod. Every little helps to build our audience, and that means we get to share fantastic nonfiction with more people just like you. And it helps us to keep bringing you the greatest authors and the hottest reads.
Nonfic Pod is brought to you by Beatrice Bazell, Emma Byrne, Georgie Codd, Felicity Quick and Mike Wyer. Our patron shout-outs go to David Corney and Mike Wyer. Thank you for your support.